Tonight we're in Doncaster, and this is Question Time. Good evening, welcome, whether you're watching on television, listening on the radio, to our audience and to our panel tonight. The Conservative member of the European Parliament, one of the leading lights of the campaign to leave the EU, Daniel Hannan. Labour's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Owen Smith. The leader of the SNP at Westminster, Angus Robertson. The Green Party's only member in the House of Lords, Jenny Jones. And from the Taxpayers' Alliance, Diya Chakrabarti. Thank you very much, and as ever, don't forget you've got Facebook, Twitter and text all at your disposal to complain about what these people say. 83981 is the text number to comment on. Let's have our first question. It comes from Jason Leeson, please. Jason?
Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, how genuine is Jeremy Corbyn's newfound support of the EU?
Right. Daniel Hannan.
Oh, about 2. The guy has made a career out of not changing his mind, and now, for political reasons, he has to find a way of justifying switching to a pro-EU position. And let's just think through the logic of what he said today. What he said was, I'm in favour of the EU, but not this EU. I want a completely different one. Social Europe, one that has democracy and workers' rights and so on. Well, great, but that's not the one on the ballot paper. If the Prime Minister's renegotiation taught us one thing, it's how immune to reform, how intractable the European Union is. Its second largest net contributor was about to vote on whether to leave, and it couldn't bring itself to make any changes. So the idea that we're going to stick around and it will then suddenly reform, I mean, come on, we've had 40 years of Brussels becoming more remote, more corrupt, more undemocratic. What on earth in that record makes us think that if we stick with it a little bit longer, it'll suddenly become more congenial?
Okay. Owen Smith.
I'd say it was about a 7. I mean, Jeremy has in the past...
A 7 only?
I think it's about a 7. And I think it's a 7 because he reflects the country on this, Jeremy. He said today he's... You don't let me finish. He said today that he's made his mind up. And I think the country's making his mind up. That's the point I'm trying to get across, that Jeremy is someone who used to be opposed to the EU. Very clearly he voted against it in the 1970s. He was very clearly thought it was problematic when he was on the backbenches of the Labour Party. And in the last few years, and perhaps even in the last few weeks, he's come to a different view, and a view which is now, I think, united with the Labour movement. We now feel collectively that we should stay in the European Union. And the reason he's come to that view, perhaps it's not, you know, a 10, but the reason he's come to that 7 is he thinks that the jobs that we need in this country, the security we need in this country, the challenges to be met by this country, whether that's tax avoidance or security for people, are best met by our sticking together. That's at the heart of the Labour Party's core beliefs, that we are always stronger when we stick together, and that's why he has come, perhaps, on a journey. And I think a lot of people in this country are going on that journey too, and I hope they'll get to the same place.
What's curious is when he was running for the leadership and he was asked whether he'd vote to leave, he said, I wouldn't rule it out, voting to leave. So I wonder whether it was Cameron's success in negotiating that finally persuaded him.
I don't think David Cameron persuades Jeremy Corbyn very much. He certainly doesn't persuade me.
But nothing else has changed. Nothing else has changed in the year since he said he'd think of voting out.
I genuinely think, Jeremy, and I've talked about this with him on several occasions over the last few weeks, I genuinely think he, like many of us in the country, has thought hard about whether he thinks we should be in or out, and he's decided on balance we should be in. And I think that's a reasonable, sensible view to him to come to, and I think lots of people will make exactly the same journey.
And you said 7 out of 10 for genuineness. Do you think you might up it to 10 out of 10 by the 23rd of June?
Well, with a bit of luck. He's got a few more speeches to give.
And a few more corners to turn. Jenny Jones for the Green Party. Now, the Greens are all in favour of staying in, aren't they?
Well, the party's in favour of staying in the EU. I personally, I'm a rebel. and I'm voting out. The Green Party's analysis of the EU is that it's a very badly flawed organisation, but it's better to stay in and try to reform it because it does do good at various levels. My personal view is, I agree with the analysis, but my personal view is that it's unreformable. And I deeply regret that because I can see the value in many of the things that the EU does. But at one and the same time, they, for example, they're doing fantastic things on air quality. They are pressurising governments to clean up their act, to make sure that we can breathe our air, which is absolutely filthy in many cities. But at the same time, it's the EU's fault because of corporate lobbying by various car companies that we took up so strongly with diesel in the first place and started polluting our towns and cities.
So you're really with Daniel Hannan, you believe it's unreformable at this stage?
Dan and I are as one.
All right, OK. And where do you stand? Up there on the top left there.
OK, I agree with, well, Jeremy, obviously. He probably takes the view that I do, that, yes, the EU has warts, and we all know about those warts. But the thing is it the right time to come out of the EU with the world being so unstable as it is at the moment?
OK. And Jenny, I didn't ask you. Because the question was, how genuine is Corbyn's support? 1 out of 10. What's your answer?
I'm afraid, a 2 or a 3 at best. I do feel deeply sorry for Jeremy because he seems to be fitting into some sort of straitjacket within the Labour Party. And I have said to him, there's always a place in the Green Party for him. And I think, you know, we've got better social policies than the Labour Party these days, and we've got all the Green policies as well. So, you know, I think Jeremy would fit in better with us.
All right. The woman there.
What I wanted to ask was, do the panel actually feel that this is really, the position on Europe is really about ideology, this referendum? What concerns me is that we're getting a lot of smoke and mirrors politics about the choices we have, and we're not getting a clear debate, and that's what concerns me.
And in what way? Just go on a little bit longer. What is it? What is it? Take an issue. What is it that concerns you?
Well, for instance, David Cameron, I feel it has actually contradictory statements on the European Union, and I feel that in itself confuses people when he's saying now that he wants to stay in the EU.
Angus Robertson, this is getting a bit like Strictly. 1 out of 10, but you can give your answer first, and then 1 out of 10 on...
I'd like to pick up from the ladies just
genuineness.
said there, because obviously in Scotland we went through a referendum process in 2014, so we've got quite a lot of insight into how referenda happen. And one of the things that concerns me greatly is the extent to which and we're hearing it already, the personalisation of some of this. Secondly, that the nature of some of the arguments are so unbelievably aimed at scaring people. People in Scotland weren't stupid. People in Doncaster, in the rest of the UK, are not stupid either. Now, I'm pro-European. I wish Scotland, I wish the UK to remain within the European Union. But I would wish people to make that decision to vote to remain within the EU on the basis of confidence, of positive arguments, of why it's good to be part of a large single market. And here I would agree with Jeremy Corbyn. It's not just about an argument about a single market. It's about workers' rights, it's about social rights, it's about environmental progress. And I know this argument is lost sometimes because it's about jobs and it's about numbers and it's confusing. Let us not forget how this came about, which is we in Europe have been unable to keep the peace between us for more than any number of decades. And after the Second World War, France and Germany, and then sometime later the UK, got together and said, for all the imperfections, for all the things that don't work well, and by goodness, there are a lot of things that need to be reformed and improved, but we are far better working together as sovereign states, and I would wish Scotland to be a sovereign state within the EU at the top table too, but we're much better working together in that context.
Angus, I want to bring you back to the question.
It's not about Jeremy Corbyn, and it's not about how persuaded am I. Am I persuaded by his change, which does seem very... No, I don't find it tremendously persuasive, but I do find the argument strong. So I'm not going to second-guess the motivation.
OK, just hang on a second. Just finish with the point. On 1 out of 10, how genuine is his support for the EU? In your view, you see him week after week in the House of Commons. What do you think?
Well, I don't think I've heard him ask a single question about the European Union in the House of Commons since he's become leader of the Labour Party.
Oh, I think he has.
OK.
If the European Union were an association of sovereign states, no one would be against it. We wouldn't be having this argument. We wouldn't be having this referendum. Everyone is in favour of cooperating and trading with our friends and allies. You'd have to be insane to be against that. The problem with it is that it's become remote and self-serving and corrupt. And Angus is absolutely right. The arguments that are being used, and I'm afraid Jeremy Corbyn did it today, the argument, the scare story is that, you know, it's the only guarantee of equal pay for women. We had the Equal Pay Act in 1970 before we joined. We had paid holidays. Chamberlain introduced them in 1938. The idea that we owe all of these things to Jean-Claude Juncker, people know when they're being taken for fools.
Thank you. Deirdre. Jason, I want to come back to you in a moment, but dear Chakravarti first. 1 to 10, how genuine?
Right. Before I say anything, I should make this point very clear that Taxpayers Alliance, as an organisation of nearly 80,000 supporters across the country, we don't take a position on this. We have supporters both in the in-camp and the out-camp. We actually have staff members both in the in-camp and the out-camp. So, having said that, I am going to give you two answers on these numbers, David. I apologise in advance. I think as a person, Jeremy Corbyn is a 1, which is about where I stand. I think as Labour leader, he's probably about 7, because what he actually said today was that the Labour Party was overwhelmingly in favour of staying within the EU, which I imagine is actually probably the sort of the... Well, OK, I can understand that. And the reason why I think he agrees with me as a human being, and he's at 1, and this is where I'm going to disagree with the lady at the back, where you claimed, Jeremy, for your, to share your views. I think he shares my views, and I think for precisely the same reasons.
What are your views?
Which are as follows. I think that the EU is extremely... It's an unaccountable body. You know, most people have no idea who their MEPs are. If you don't know who your MEP is, how are you going to hold that person to account? You know, working at Westminster, I know just how difficult it is to hold MPs to account, and this is yet another step removed. Secondly, it's a very wasteful body. You know, we pay our MEPs... I'm so sorry, Dan, this is not a personal attack.
He doesn't want to be an MEP.
I know, but you know, just
you can always give it up.
Just being polite.
Hang on, hold on, dear. Dia says nobody knows who their MEP is. Do they know who you are?
We have, I think, the Sun some years ago said, do you know who your... They had 8 photographs, and they said, can you identify your MEP? Now, if we were completely invisible, you'd have got 12.5% picking the right one by the law of averages. In fact, it was less than that. So we have some kind of negative visibility. We have some antimatter.
It's a deliberate...
And that's because nobody feels European in the same sense that people feel Swedish or Portuguese.
Hang on a second. Just while you're... If the EU had developed without that Parliament, without people like you as MEPs saving all that money, and had just been the governments of the 27, 28 countries, would it be better?
Yes, if it were an intergovernmental association that didn't presume to legislate for its member states, that didn't have a legal system that can strike down the legislation of its member states, that has primacy, then we'd all be in favour of that. No one is proposing that the alternative to the EU is not talking to our friends and allies. What we want is the right to live under our own laws while trading with our friends around the world.
OK. I'll just briefly finish off.
Just quickly. And the third point that really does bother me is that from outside the EU, it looks very much like a cartel of rich countries that keep all the poorer developing countries outside the trade bloc. And that bugs me. And that is done in my name. I don't like that, and I don't know who to complain to. So it's a very problematic situation for me. And for that reason, and I think Jeremy Corbyn would agree with all of those reasons just there, I just can't see myself voting in.
OK. The woman there in spectacles on the gangway.
I'd just like to say that I think if we do leave the EU, in spite of all the glorious things that this gentleman here...
on my right here.
On your right,
Daniel Hannan, yes.
Daniel Hannan thinks is going to happen. It'll be just like Animal Farm. Something equally hideous will arise with several heads, costing twice as much again, but with the added disadvantage that we will have hacked all our good friends and neighbours in Europe off by saying we want to be your friend, but actually under our terms and conditions.
OK. No. And you in the middle there with spectacles, yes?
Yeah. First of all, I feel British and I definitely feel European. I feel very at home in Europe. We've been fed a load of rubbish by the media for 20 years, I think the quote from Rupert Murdoch saying that he wants to leave the EU because in Downing Street he gets listened to and they do what he says, and in Brussels he gets ignored. It's very telling of why the Sun and the other media are against the EU.
Yeah. If he gets listened to in number 10, why is the Prime Minister staying in, not voting for Brexit?
Well, he still gets listened to by David Cameron and a lot of other things.
And the man on your right, I don't know whether you are friends and you agree with each other, but...
Well, what I was going to say was that Owen has stated that the Labour Party has a united position, that it is pro-European. Then how come there has been such a lack of cross-party support? As a 17-year-old that can't vote in the upcoming referendum, I find it absolutely insulting that to support the In campaign in such a divided form that it is. And I think that, compared to the Out campaign, is a shame on all that support Europe.
Well, I think it's very simple. I think we're making a specific Labour case of being in Europe, a social case, a socialist case, as Jeremy called it today. We do strongly feel, and I think Jeremy has genuinely come to the view that we would see jobs in parts of Britain, like Doncaster, at risk if we pulled out of Europe. In my part of the world, I know... Airbus, the great company that is based across the UK and also in France, only this week, they said, and they support 7,000 jobs in Wales, 15,000 jobs across the whole of the UK. They said this week they wouldn't be in the UK if we were not in the EU. Now, that is the fact. Daniel can want a different world, but the world we've got is one where we are in the EU right now, and if we vote to leave, we will see economic consequences for this country and jobs will be lost. It isn't scaremongering. It is a statement of fact.
Right. Since the referendum was declared, we have created more jobs here than in the other 27 member states put together. There's been more investment here than... So plainly, in the real world, the world of evidence, not supposition, there is no lack of investment coming in. We heard exactly these arguments about the euro. Everyone said, oh, we'll be left and the investment will go away and unemployment will rise. Not only did that not happen, but it did happen in the Eurozone.
Can you name, Daniel, a single senior business person or a big company in this country who is advocating that? How many?
Absolutely. I would rather trust award-winning exporters like JCB, like Dyson, like Tate & Lyle, like Legal & General, rather than some mega banks.
Let's do this listing is very, very boring. But Daniel, a very simple question. Do you think British industry exporters will have exactly the same deal in Europe as they have now? No tariffs? Or do you think there will be a bit of a tariff?
I think there will be. I'm certain there will be no tariffs. And again,
at all?
It's better, yes.
So there'll be no difference.
It's better to go on evidence than supposition. There is not a single country in Europe, whether or not they're in the EU, that is outside the free trade area. You can go from non-EU Iceland to non-EU Turkey, and you do not come across a single tariff, a single trade barrier. Okay. So the idea that we would be uniquely penalised...
But, Daniel, to be fair, you need to acknowledge then that if you're advocating the Norwegian position, which is not a member of the European Union, but is a member of the European Free Trade Association, that they still have to pay their membership subs, that they get faxed European legislation to the government in Oslo. That is the way it works. And my argument is, I think we should be better reforming all of the long list of things that need to be reformed, rather than taking ourselves out of the biggest single market in the world, which, by the way, has helped secure social rights, workers' rights, gender rights. These things matter.
OK, let me go to Jason. Jason, who asked the question. What's your mark for Corbyn out of 10?
Well, I mean, we've been talking about Europe generally there, but going back to Corbyn, he's been speaking out, about Europe for years. I mean, 40 years. He should have stuck to what he believed in.
Yeah.
And he's been vindicated. Because what he was saying was the European Union will stop a left-of-centre government implementing its programme, which is exactly what has just happened in Greece. So I would not have voted for Alexis Tsipras, but the case that Tony Benn and that the Labour left used to make, which is democracy will be stopped by bureaucracy, has just been absolutely shown to be true.
Right. I've got another question here ready on Europe. We've heard quite a lot of people pro-in. Hear from somebody who's in favour of out. Just, oh, my God. I'll take you in the second row from the back. I'm sorry, I can't bring everybody in. Yes, that's you, with respect.
Nobody knows what will happen whether we stay in Europe or leave Europe. I think it's about time politicians were honest. We keep on getting this will happen, that will happen. Nobody knows.
How do you take it? How do you decide how to vote then? Or do you think there should never have been?
On what you see in your everyday life. You look round where you live, you look round the country, you see what you see, and you take a decision. I think our default position on Europe should be we're not paying, we will govern ourselves, and if you're prepared to deal with us, we shall deal with you.
OK, thank you. Right, we'll move on. There's time to talk more about Europe, but there's a question, I mean, because everybody wants to talk about Europe, and we had, I have to say, over half the questions we had tonight were about Europe. Some people think people are getting bored of the subject, but question time audiences are clearly not. Andy Ramsbottom, please.
Yeah, isn't it true that the only way to have control over UK borders and immigration is to leave the European Union?
Owen Smith.
Well, I think it's clearly true that if we weren't in the EU and we wanted to be out of the single market, then we could exercise greater control. We could stop having free movement of people. However, and Angus raised the question about Norway earlier on, the reality is, the plain truth is that all of the countries outside the EU that want to enjoy the benefits of trade, Norway, Switzerland, also are subject to the same rules about free movement of people. So Norway, for example, has a higher proportion of immigrants versus its country than the UK does. So does Switzerland, and they also have to enact in their own national legislation all of the EU rules.
Why do you assume the same thing would happen to Britain, which is a far larger country than Switzerland, Norway or anywhere else you mentioned?
Because I think that the gentleman who said a moment ago that we don't know what's going to happen, he's right, we don't know precisely what's going to happen, but I think as politicians we've got a duty to lead and try and suggest what we think is likely. And on the basis of history, on the basis of what we see around the rest of Europe, the most likely scenario is that for us to be able to enjoy all the benefits of trade and take part in the biggest market across the world, those 500 million people to whom we can sell and from whom we can buy, we'll need to play by the rules.
All right.
So, yes, we can exercise more control, but at what cost?
Jenny Jones.
I don't think that in or out is going to make much difference to levels of immigration because we have a moderately healthy economy. People are always going to want to come and to get a piece of it and to work here. And personally, I think migration is a fantastic thing because we need migrants. I'd just like to point out that migrants here in Britain pay more than their fair share of taxes and they actually take less than their fair share of benefits. And so migrants are actually a great thing for Britain. The NHS would fall over without enough migrants to fill the nursing jobs, the service providers, the doctors.
But you're saying you think there's no difference in your view in the ability to control immigration, even though every of the 550 whatever it is million people in the EU have the right to come here without question. You don't think leaving the EU will make any difference?
I don't. I really don't. I think that I think that migrants are always going to want to come here. It's a very attractive country, and the fact is we need them.
Sorry, the difference is. At the moment, you have to let them in. If you're out of the EU, will you still have to let them in?
What about all the Brits that go abroad? We've got 1 million Brits living in Spain, 2 million in the rest of the EU, and not to mention Australia and the US and so on. We are migrants too.
All right.
And we have to accept that they are a great thing.
Dear Chakravarti.
Well, as a first-generation immigrant, I happen to agree with Jenny. Migration can be a great thing. But the point... But I would like to take it back to the point I was previously making about the EU, that migration can be a great thing. Free movement of people has benefited, countries over the years. But to the world outside the EU, it still looks very much like a cartel. So if you are outside the EU, even if you have a skill which you can very well sell to the UK or the EU, you can't bring it in here as easily as you can if you belong in the EU. So for all its ideals of free market and free world, the EU is not really that free to the people outside that bloc. And I think that is a problem in an increasingly global...
Do you have a view about the level, which clearly Andy does, a view about the level of immigration? I mean, you say if we left the EU, then it wouldn't be automatic you get in. You're suggesting it'd be easier to get here from outside the EU than it is at the moment. I mean, you came from Bangladesh here, and you think it will be easier for people from Asian subcontinent to come here than it is now?
What I'm suggesting is it would perhaps benefit the country to have a system where the country can decide what skill sets people coming in can bring into the country.
Okay.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. The woman there. I'm getting to you. Yes, you. Yes.
Simplify it. I want my country back and I want freedom.
All right. And when you say you want your country back, what do you mean?
I don't believe our country's free anymore. You only have to look at the European Union and what's going off there. I want my country back. I want Britain to be Britain. I just want... We're all so frustrated with all this talk about the EU and all this rubbish we're hearing. That gentleman there in the orange tie, he knows what goes on. He knows what goes on in Europe. Absolutely.
You wouldn't believe the half of it.
All right. And Angus Roberts, would you like to answer her point directly?
Well, I think there's a challenge because outside the European Union, the UK and other states are able to exercise border controls. And within the European Union, there is free movement of citizens within the European Union. And we need to understand that there's a balance, because there's also rights to UK citizens, the rights of those 1 million people from the UK who live in Spain, the 300,000 people from the UK who live in France, the nearly 300,000 UK passport holders who live in the Irish Republic. There are huge advantages to people from the UK to be able to live and work elsewhere in Europe.
But
too.
do you accept what Andy said, which was the only true way to have control over the borders is to leave the EU?
Yes is the answer, but that is not what I want, because I'm in favour of people from this country being able to live and work elsewhere in Europe too. I think we need to be honest. We need to be honest. This is about sharing sovereignty, and there are upsides and there are downsides. And anybody who is suggesting that there is not an issue with migration, with the difficulties of millions of people who are fleeing for their lives, please, and let's not forget that, from Syria and elsewhere. And we have responsibilities to deal with these issues, but let's not simplify it down to being simply an issue of leaving the European Union and everything will be fine, because it will not.
Okay.
It will not.
You sir there on the side.
Well, if I come out of the European Union and I want to work in France, if I've got the skills, they'll let me work in France. Why do I have to win the European Union for that?
All right, and the woman in red there, with the spectacles in the middle there, yes.
I absolutely think that we should stay in Europe, because we're talking about the people in Britain that are going outside of the country to work in the rest of Europe, but what about all of the national companies that have come here to build their factories, you know, the car manufacturers here, and sell their products here? If we're not part of the EU, they're not going to be able to sell their products to people all over the world who have got trade agreements with the EU, and it could take years for us to make those trade agreements ourselves.
Daniel?
So what about those jobs?
I think the key word in Andy's question was control. I'm in favour of legal immigration, economic migration. I think this country benefits from the energy and enterprise of people who are prepared to uproot themselves and cross half the world in some cases to come here. And I also think we're a generous country that will always make space for people who are in need of sanctuary. But if we are to accept a measure of net inward migration, what we ask in return is a sense that we are roughly in charge of who comes in and in roughly what numbers. And as long as we're in the EU, we have no such sense. Now, and we have a crazy policy where we have to open our borders to 600 million people who happen to hold EU passports. But as Dia says, this means that in practice, we have to keep out people who may have family links here, whose families may have fought for us in the 2 wars when we were most in trouble. There will be Brits of Commonwealth origin watching this programme now who have had huge difficulties bringing Auntie over for a wedding. I mean, never mind, not trying to settle here, right? Because we've had so severely to restrict our visas for non-EU nationals in order to free up unlimited space for people with no connection to this country. I think that's unfair. I think it's immoral. And I also think it makes no sense economically. One more point, if I may. The migration crisis, like the euro crisis, is deteriorating before our eyes. Now, because we kept our border checks, because we didn't join Schengen, and because we kept the pound, we have other options. We don't need to make those problems our problems. And the choice we face on the 23rd of June is, do we want to embroil ourselves in the bailouts and the more integration, everything else that is coming because of the deteriorating crisis on the continent? Or shouldn't we follow a different trajectory, reorienting to the wider world, i.e. the bits of the world that are in fact growing?
Thank you. Right. You seem to have got your passport there. You don't need a passport for Doncaster.
No, I actually was so desperate to come to your debate that I flew in from Strasbourg to do it.
I thought it was a prop.
Yes, I thought he was going to brandish this, yes. Now, look, we'll go on to another question now, I think. A lot of hands up still, and thank you very much for all that. And but we've had half an hour, and we've got some other questions to come. Join us in Exeter next week, or in Hull the week after. You can apply on our website. The telephone number's there. As always, I'll give the details at the end. But let's take another question. This is from David Clayton.
Has the time now come to abolish inheritance tax, considering it's simply a tax on already taxed income?
No. Is it time to... Right. And this was a question, of course, raised in the House of Commons. They were talking about inheritance tax and David Cameron's inheritance, which... well, all the rest of it. And Dia Chakravarti, do you think it's right to abolish inheritance tax?
Yes, I agree with David. And there are more reasons. I mean, that's a very good place to start. It is indeed double taxation. There are other good reasons for it as well. And I think the most compelling reason, and this is why inheritance tax is it is the most hated tax in this country. There was a poll done last year by YouGov, and it was found that even people who don't expect to pay it hate it, because it goes against the very basic human nature and instinct to provide for one's family and leave something behind. And that's why, it's just such an unnatural law that it's difficult to sell it to anybody, really. The third point, along with your first one and then my second and the third point, is that it is a hugely complex piece of legislation. It takes up 10% of our insanely complicated tax code, and it brings in about 0.7% of revenue. And there are so many different loopholes in that piece of legislation. You can declare it as an agricultural land, and that means something else, etc., etc. And some people bring up the equality point about taking it from the very rich and giving it to someone else, redistribution. The reality of it is that the super rich, the very people at the top, will always have different ways of getting around it, precisely because it's such a...
Okay.
Precisely because it's such a complicated piece of legislation.
All right.
So the people who are stuck with it, are the aspirational middle class right in the middle. And since 2010, the number of people paying inheritance tax has quadrupled. So it really is the people in the middle who feel the pinch. So it really is, absolutely, we should abolish it. Yeah.
Jenny Jones, do you think it's right that parents should leave things to their children and should be taxed as low as possible, or are you in favour of inheritance tax as it stands?
Well, as a general view on tax, I'm very in favour of paying tax. I think it's at the cost of a civilised society. Taxes pay for the sort of things that we all need at some point in our lives, whether it's hospital care or schools or even roads. But inheritance tax, I do think, is iniquitous. I think it's absolutely wrong that it's twice tax money. I think it's wrong. There are better ways. If we closed a few of the tax avoidance gaps, these these legal loopholes that were never designed to prevent people paying tax, but people have managed to find and get around the regulations. Or we follow up on some of the tax evasion that's happening, and which this government doesn't seem to be at all interested in getting to grips with.
So we've had another Green rebellion before our very eyes, have we?
Do you know,
No inheritance tax.
I'm embarrassed to say I don't know what the party policy is on inheritance tax. So I hope I'm not rebelling on this as well. But I do think it's a ridiculous tax.
Okay.
It should go.
Okay, you sir, in the one to the fourth row, yes.
I'm proud to be a taxpayer, and I'm proud that I should be able to earn every single amount of money that I earn, and I should be able to spend or give it to whoever I choose I want to give it to. I shouldn't have to be double taxed.
You shouldn't have to be double taxed. Okay, and you sir, on the third row there, in the blue, yeah.
My big worry is we're creating a very selfish and insular society. This idea that tax in any shape or form is wrong. And as you rightly said, you know, we need these things to pay for the NHS. We need these things to pay for schools. We need these things to pay for benefits. And I feel as though there's quite a lot of people who feel as though I shouldn't pay any tax because maybe they earn enough to use private healthcare or, you know, private schools or things of that nature, things that I know a lot of the Tory party already enjoy. So my worry is we should be looking at tax as more of a moral obligation than a legal obligation.
Change the narrative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Pay my tax bill if you like.
Who said that?
That's the problem. That's the problem.
You want him to pay your tax bill?
Well, if he's keen on paying tax, he can pay mine for sure.
Anybody else want their tax bill paid by him?
Do you need the NHS? Do you need the NHS?
Let him have a say. No.
You've just argued against paying no tax.
No, I pay my tax, and I'm happy to pay my tax, but we pay too much. One of my earlier questions would have been, why does it cost so much to be in Europe?
Okay.
It's ridiculous. Right. It's because there's too many people with first-class tickets on the gravy train.
Okay. Owen Smith. And one of the things that came up in those comments, whether it's right, I think people are saying that giving money and then, you know, as long as you live 7 years, you don't have to pay inheritance tax. Is that right? Do you think people should Labour crack down on inheritance? Do you approve of people giving money to their children? What's your position on it?
It's entirely legal, but it is a dodge. It's a way in which people who've got lots of money avoid paying tax. And the one good thing that has come out of the extraordinarily unseemly mess about tax and the Panama Papers is that we are at last in this country having a serious conversation about tax. Because for 30 or even 40 years in this country, the debate about tax, the crucial debate about how we raise enough revenue to pay for our hospitals and our schools and all of the things to look after our children, our grandparents, has just sat there with neither party, frankly, bold enough to grab it. And I'm pleased that coming out of the Panama Papers, which has revealed, as Dia says, that so many people who are extraordinarily wealthy in this country and across the world are avoiding their taxes, and in doing that, they are robbing the rest of us.
Yes.
Because they're robbing...
Okay. Why did Labour then raise the level at which you have to start paying inheritance tax by nearly by a third, from 215 to 325?
I think that was a mistake. I think that was a mistake, and I think the truth is that we've got a yawning gap in this country and across the Western world between a few percentage points of the population who've got an extraordinary amount of wealth and the vast majority of us who struggle to get by. And if we don't have wealth taxes, and inheritance tax at some level is a wealth tax, then we will continue to see larger and larger amounts of money gather at the top of society in the hands of those few percentage points, and we will not see the rest of society, including people here in Doncaster, enjoy the benefits of the social provisions that comes through those taxes. So we need to be tough about this.
So you would like to reverse the change that Labour made when in office?
I'll certainly reverse the change that the Tories made recently, and I would, you know, I think...
Which is their change?
Well, they recently changed inheritance tax and made it even easier to get rid of money in the last but one budget. They changed it twice, I think, since they came in. Crucially, the decisions they've made on tax reveal all you need to know about the Tories. They cut the top rate of tax for millionaires in this country. Everybody earning over £150,000 got a big bung. And what did they do in the last budget? They took money away from disabled people here and across Britain. The wrong priority.
OK, let me I'll come to you, Dan. The one up there, with respect... Yes, that's you, yes.
Yeah, I find the question for Doncaster, really, that question that was posed, quite ironic, because I see lots of women, my friends, like myself, who's going to lose my job in 2 weeks' time because the Tories have been stealing our tax, and domestic violence services are closing. Women's Aid is closing in 2 weeks' time. It's been here for 40 years, and it's closing because the Tories
it's all because... Just explain what you mean. Because of the Tories doing what, exactly?
Well, what we're talking about, the Panama Papers, well, everybody, it's like almost the elephant in the room. The question about inheritance tax is a small issue. The question of Google and Boots and, you name it, Starbucks, the question of Tories. I don't know how you dare talk about Europe being corrupt when we have Cameron, who said that he would look after the vulnerable in 2010, and he has stripped us of everything. And this town is poor.
OK. All right. Thank you. No, Daniel Hammond. Thank you very much. Daniel Hammond.
Well, the question was, should we abolish inheritance tax?
I wanted to address what she's just said, a major attack on your party.
record in Doncaster.
Well, I mean, first of all, the big tax dodge, if you want to look for tax dodge, is that Eurocrats don't pay national taxes at all. So, I'm sorry,
totally irrelevant.
OK, well, you tell me what Cameron did.
Come off it.
All right. OK.
In 2010, we were told a lie. We were told that we had to take austerity. We had to lose our jobs, our libraries, our swimming baths. And do you know what happened? Cameron did not look after the vulnerable. He made sure that the rich got richer and richer, and the gap is wide.
I'd like to get back to the original question at some stage, but since you say it's not reasonable to link it to Europe, all right. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, between 2010 and 2015, during the coalition parliament, all of the austerity cuts put together saved £36 billion.
It's a lie.
During that period...
Sorry, ma'am. Please, can you take the microphone away while Daniel answers? Because otherwise we won't be able to hear what he says. We heard what you said. We want to hear him now.
I'm not so keen.
All right.
You may not want to, but everybody else wants to.
So we can all remember the circumstances in 2010. We had a bigger deficit than Greece. We were in a bad place. We had to make some savings. According to the IFS, all of those savings put together came to a total of £36 billion. Over the lifetime of that same Parliament, our gross contribution to the EU budget was £85 billion. Our net contribution was £42 billion. So it's all very well to say, oh, you mustn't link the two things. With that one clean excision, even if you take the net figure, we could have wiped out every single one of the austerity measures and still had enough left over to take a penny of income tax.
Let's talk about the cuts
I'm sorry,
to
but
disabled people.
When
you're priorities of your Tory government to cut
but if you're handing
taxes for millionaires,
million quid a week to Brussels, think of how much you could...
Daniel, I know you're very keen to go on making the point about Europe, but her question wasn't about that. And we know that even if it's Brexit, it's 2 years before or so while you negotiate to get out. She's talking about what's happened since the last election.
That's right.
And the measures that were taken since 2010. It's all right, ma'am. I'll do it for you for the moment. But I'll answer her point.
I mean, and local services in Doncaster are obviously up to the council in Doncaster. But in terms of... and should be, and quite rightly so.
The government's cut the funding.
OK.
Can you feel the anger? Can you hear how unhappy people are in Doncaster and elsewhere about the fact that we know that we have been played by an ultra-rich elite in this country and around the world who fiddle their taxes, who salt it away in tax havens, and this government says that the biggest problem when it comes to the abuse is the abuse of benefits. In poor communities, one is pursuing the poorest in society, and I think the abuse of benefits is wrong. But let's understand the order of the abuse that's going on. Just over £1 billion is estimated to go in the direction of abuse of benefits. The tax gap, that is from people who evade it and avoid it, is more than £30 billion. Going up. Now, I ask you then, why is it that the staffing levels in the HMRC, who deal with pursuing the richest in society, are significantly less than they use to pursue the poorest in society? It shows the priority of the Tories, and people should be very, very angry about that.
I know you said this in the House of Commons this week. You said they only had 300 people investigating tax evasion. We asked them today, and they say they have 26,000 people.
I asked about the ultra-rich.
Hang on.
I asked about the ultra-rich.
They have 26,000 doing enforcement, and more than 400 on high net worth, which is the ultra-rich.
Yeah, and as we know, the problem that came out of the Panama Papers is the ultra-rich.
Okay.
And
now,
I'm asking, why are there so few people relative to the rest of the staffing levels in the HMRC who are dealing with the ultra-rich, who are taking their money elsewhere and are not paying for the hospitals and are not paying for the roads, are not paying for public services in Doncaster, and they should be doing that?
Now, when Angus started speaking, there was a very loud shout of rubbish from somebody. I'd like to go to the person who, because I'm sure you want to say something, who said rubbish.
Oh, it must have been me again.
Oh, no, not you.
Can you remember when the banks went down and the deficit and the national debt? Has everyone forgot about that, or was that just made up? Do you remember? That's why there's been cuts and that's why there's been austerity, because we've got to close the gap. Okay. And these lot think there wasn't a deficit and it was all made up.
OK, the man in red there in the back row, just away from you.
Close these tax loopholes, made people to pay their taxes, we won't need cuts to begin with. Deficit would be reducing.
Incidentally, this government is closing HMRC offices right around the UK. Yeah. You would have thought they'd be wanting to get the tax money in.
All right. Wait a minute. If everybody talks, nobody hears anything. The man in red, and you were talking to him over there, and I'll keep the panel quiet just for a moment.
There's £36 billion in austerity measures. There's over £30 billion in unpaid tax. Don't take a genius to realise if we close the tax loopholes, get that £30 billion in tax, we don't need to make austerity measures. Yep. There you go.
Very good.
Deficit reduced.
You want to come back on this, Owen?
Well, the gentleman's got a point. The truth is that the tax gap, the gap between how much we should be getting in and how much we are getting in, according to the government itself, has gone up on their watch. If they've been so careful to try and clamp down on tax avoidance, as David Cameron would have us all believe, it wouldn't be rising in this country. It's up to 34 billion. But the big question here is, what are the choices, the priorities of government? Are they choosing, in this period of austerity, to get extra money from those people who've got a lot of money, to ask those with the widest shoulders to bear the biggest burden? Or are they instead looking for the little man, whether it's the small business or individuals here and across the country, to carry the burden? And I fear the last 6 years has seen the little man carry the burden far too often.
All right, I'll come to you. You're on the front row there.
Angus, you were very quick to criticise cuts, but what would you be doing now if you were leading an independent Scotland with no money?
Well, the first thing...
Oh, no, thank you, Angus. We'll come back to that another
day.
You're in the green shirt there.
Yes, indeed. Well, I've heard it all now. The inheritance tax is all Europe's fault. That's the first time. It's amazing, that, really. But what we're forgetting, we're looking at the big guys. We're mixing things up here. We're looking at the big guys, you know, who are avoiding the tax, you know, the Googles of this world. It's nothing. But inheritance tax is going to hit a lot of middle people, especially in London and the South East, where they live in a dingy semi and it's worth £1 million. They'll all fall into this inheritance tax. So we may have to look at doing a two-tier inheritance tax, maybe for London and the South East, and do a lot lower for the rest of the country. Because a lot of people who are living in the South East are living in these houses for years, and suddenly they're going massively up in value, and there's no stopping it at the moment.
And you up there?
I think the debate is all focused on the wrong thing. We're talking about cutting inheritance tax, but what we should be looking at is the tax that's gone up over the decades and really affects the poorest in society.
Yes.
And what we should do is stop VAT, cut it, you'll get the economy booming again, people will start buying, and that's where a real choice that will affect people's lives, it'll affect their energy bills, it'll affect the whole economy.
All right. So
Hold on, Daniel. I'll chair this, not you. I heard him too. I know you're... But it's true. Owen did just say, as you said, VAT should be abolished.
And
a very
could
good
we
point.
do that while we are in the European Union?
Please.
Raise income tax on the richest.
No, hang on. He said it was a very good point.
Well, it is
Labour policy now,
it
under
is a very good
under your
point.
leadership, to abolish VAT?
No, that's not what he said. He said cut VAT. In the last Labour government, if you remember, when we hit the crash,
I didn't say
cut
cut,
VAT
I said abolish it.
He said abolish. He said abolish.
And we saw an extra $5 billion in the economy.
You know that cannot be done while we're members of the European
cutting
Union.
it would be a good idea.
Have the right to cut our own
The sales
indirect
tax like
taxes.
America, which is 5%. But, you know...
The person in spectacles there in the second row from the back. You.
I feel like we've got away from the real issue here, which is inheritance...
No, really?
which is inheritance tax.
Yes, what
and
do you
I was
think of it?
reading on the Equality Trust website that one of the biggest reasons that people are rich in the UK is because they were born rich. And that's the purpose behind inheritance tax. It's to deal with that... Shut up. The purpose behind the tax is to deal with that trouble. Whether it's an efficient tax is a question that needs to be answered. And if it's not, then we need to look at other ways to address the issue of how prosperity, wealth is derived from who your parents are rather than what you work for.
OK, thank you. And I'll take one more point from the woman there, and then I've got a last question. Yes.
I don't disagree with the gentleman's point about possibly banding it to different levels, because one of the comments that Cameron made when he was commenting on finally decided to tell us the truth was it was only £20,000 that he got. Well, at the time, £20,000 was 2 years' wages to somebody up here.
Right.
So maybe you tax it based on how much money the person it's going to has got, rather than the geographical area or something like that.
OK. Ian Thompson, a last question for us.
At what stage does a politician's private life wander into the public interest?
What stage does a politician's private life wander into the public interest? This, of course, is about the Culture Secretary, John Whittingdale, and the stories about him that have emerged in the press and whether they should or shouldn't have done. Jenny Jones.
I do think that even Tory politicians deserve a private life. But there does seem to be something a little bit odd about this whole story, because it was exactly the sort of thing that newspapers would normally have run under a sort of kiss and tell thing. So I am curious about why some newspapers didn't run this particular story. And quite honestly, I just think there should be one rule for all, you know, and preferably that people can have a private life, and that when you have sex between consenting adults, then that seems to be OK in most people's books.
So hang on, you say you think it's OK to have a private life, but you're curious why the press didn't run it. Those two things are in conflict.
Oh, not at all.
What, you think they should have
Not
run
at all.
it, even though people are entitled to a private life?
No, in this instance, I'm surprised that they didn't run it, because they usually do. They're usually very quick to run stories about politicians doing anything wrong, whether or not they're, you know, it's with a sex worker or whatever.
And going to the cutting to the chase on it, the idea that put about is that it's because he had influence over the press, they thought they could hold him hostage. Do you think that's what happened?
I have absolutely no idea. There's been bits and pieces, dribbles coming out about this story over today and yesterday. I have absolutely no idea what the truth is. But personally, I think that politicians, everyone, should be able to have a private life.
Owen Smith.
Well, it may not be popular, but I think even politicians should be entitled to have a private life, and therefore I don't think there is any public interest ordinarily in the sex lives of politicians. In this instance, I think there is...
You think they're boring?
There is a question to be asked. There is a question to be asked, which is, because this man, John Whittingdale, is in charge of determining whether we're going to have the second half of the Leveson inquiry into phone hacking, into the key bit, really, the corruption between the police and the press that lay at the heart of the awful phone hacking scandal that saw Millie Dowler's phone hacked and all of those other dreadful things happen. You know, John Whittingdale was someone who was very much in favour when he was chairman of the Culture Select Committee of the second half of the Leveson inquiry taking place. He said so on public occasions.
Can you get to the point? Because we don't have all night.
And now he's changed his mind. Now he's changed his mind. Now he says perhaps we don't need it. Well, I'm saying there is a question to be asked, and he can solve it, can't he? Very simply. He could either announce tomorrow that he's going to go ahead and have the second part of the Leveson inquiry, and then there would be clearly no evidence to suggest that there was any undue influence on him, or he could say there was, and therefore I shouldn't take part in this decision any longer.
And what about if there wasn't and he still doesn't want to go ahead with the second part of Leveson? What does he do then?
In that case, he needs to explain why it is he's changed his mind in the last couple of months since becoming Culture
So you're using this to bullying him into doing what you would Labour want him to do?
I'm using it to ask, I think, a genuine question as to whether this important inquiry has been put on the long finger by the Tory party, and was there any reason for this minister wanting to do that?
Daniel Hannan.
I mean, I really think if you're going to allege something, allege it. Don't insinuate in this way. It's cowardly and it's unmanly.
I thought I was fairly straightforward.
The reason that this story was not run is because it's not a story. Single man has girlfriend, right? It's not exactly Watergate. So, of course, the newspapers didn't see it as a huge issue, and nor should they have done. And what I found extraordinary was all the people who'd been campaigning for newspapers not to run stories like this, all the hacked off and so on. When the system worked, when they got exactly the kind of outcome that they'd been calling for, they're now complaining because they happen not to like the person who they think should have been exposed. And I think we can all draw our own conclusions about their motivation and their hypocrisy.
Dear, and then I'll come to you, Hans.
Which, to me, again, it is a non-story, really. It is as Dan says, it's a single adult having a relationship with another single adult. So there is no story. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest anything untoward happening. So in the absence of any of that, it seems very much like that in this case in particular, the newspapers can't really win. Because if they had gone ahead and published this non-story, as I think it is, it would have been entirely plausible that the campaigners would have said they're only publishing this story and making a meal of it because they have a grudge against this person, against John Whittingdale. And now that they haven't published it, it seems like the suggestion is that something shady is going on. But in the absence of any evidence, I just don't see what the story is. I just don't see what the fuss is about.
Angus.
I was disgusted by the media coverage. I thought it was prurient, and I think it was a gross invasion of somebody who I oppose politically and his private life. I think if there are serious allegations to make them. Don't give some newspapers an excuse to print pictures of you, the woman you were going out with, what she did for a living, etc., etc., etc. And incidentally, this is exactly the same excuse and tactic that was used in previous decades to say that gay men and women couldn't serve in public life because they could be blackmailed on different issues. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. If there are allegations that can be substantiated, make that argument.
So you...
Make that argument. And provide the evidence. And provide the evidence.
OK. So you disagree with Owen Smith on this?
I disagree profoundly. I think the Labour Party really let itself down this week by allowing those who would wish to print prurient invasion of somebody's privacy, and I think they gave a very slim excuse that it was a public interest. If there's evidence, publish it.
The Labour Party didn't raise this issue. The BBC chose to raise this issue.
Some of your colleagues were on the radio and weren't even prepared to answer the question because they were so embarrassed about what was happening.
We're running out of time, so, Owen, just a last word to you, and then we must
What we're saying very simply is, why is it that the second part of the Leveson inquiry hasn't gone ahead? The Prime Minister promised Millie Dowler's parents that would happen. He isn't delivering it, and this is relevant to the issue at hand. It's relevant to John Whittingdale.
All right. Our time's up. I'm sorry we have to stop there. Our time's up here in Doncaster. We're going to be in Exeter next week. We've got Liam Fox for the Tories. We've got Kate Hoey for Labour. Paddy Ashdown for the Liberal Democrats. And the man who runs Wetherspoons, Tim Martin. So you can all come with your complaints about that. And the week after, we're going to be in Hull. And so if you'd like to come now, either Exeter or Hull, or you can't come to both, but anyway, if you're halfway through, the number to call is on the screen there. And 0330 123 99 88, or the website. Of course, if you're on 5 Live, as you know, the debate goes on through the early hours of the morning on Question Time, Extra Time. But here, the debate has to come to an end. So my thanks to our panel, to all of you who came to Doncaster tonight to take part. Many thanks. And until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
And the discussion doesn't end there on BBC One. Andrew Neils, joined by former tabloid editor Neil Wallace for Revelations and Press Regulation, and boxer David Hay on the mentality of a political fighter this week.
For waking us up.